Today's proceedings of the National Assembly. This broadcast is brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. The broadcast is available on KBC Channel 1, Bunge TV, as well as YouTube. On YouTube, you can search National Assembly proceedings, and you will be able to watch this broadcast on the go. This morning, there are a number of questions which will be asked by various members, and the questions are directed to various ministries as well as the Attorney General. The member for Kangema constituency, Honorable Clement Muturi Kigano, to ask the Attorney General, when will the government resolve the dispute between Kenya and Uganda on Migingo Island, including instituting legal proceedings before the East African Court of Justice? And what steps is the government taking to delineate Kenya's territorial boundaries? And this particular question will be replied in a written form by the Attorney General. The member for Kajiado Central Constituency, Elijah Memusi, will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Health to explain why there is a shortage of cancer drugs despite the fact that cancer is a national concern, and what measures has the ministry put in place to ensure availability and adequate supply of cancer drugs in all public health facilities. And could the ministry consider making available free cancer screening services in all public health facilities? These questions will be replied before the Departmental Committee on Health. The member for Tharaka constituency, Honorable George Kitonga Murugara, will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government whether or not he is aware of claims of the Kenya Police at Marimanti Police Station engaging in vices that include corruption, illegal erection of roadblocks with the aim of obtaining bribes from motorists, border cyclists, and other road users, and general harassment of citizens. And what action is the ministry taking against these officers, and in particular the officer commanding police station at Marimanti Police Station, for condoning and engaging in the above vices? These questions will be replied before the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security. The member for Kwanza constituency, Honorable Ferdinand Banyonyi, will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture and Livestock whether or not the Cabinet Secretary is aware that the Agriculture, Fisheries and Food Authority does not have a substantive board of directors, and further, that the Secretariat is on temporary terms of service, and when will the said board be gazetted? The reply to this will be made before the Departmental Committee on Agriculture and Livestock. The member for Laikipia County, Honorable Catherine Waruguru, will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Lands when will the Cabinet Secretary consider facilitating issuance of title deeds to persons residing in Liki, Majengo, and Solio villages in Nanyuki, Maina village in Nyahururu, and Kandutura village in Rumuruti of Laikipia County? And what steps has the ministry taken to resettle quarters at Kwambuzi land near KDF Garrison Army Barracks in Nanyuki? The reply to this will be before the Departmental Committee on Lands. The member for Keio North Constituency, Honorable Dr. James Kipkoskei Murgor, will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development about the action the ministry is taking to ensure that the high number of road accidents reported along Iten Kabarnet Road, and in particular at Kolol area, where a total of 13 accidents leading to 6 deaths have occurred in the last 10 months. What action is the ministry taking with regards to that? The Departmental Committee of Standing Order 43, paragraph 3, being a Wednesday morning, they are located for business, not sponsored by the majority or minority party or business sponsored by a committee. This particular business is a motion by the chairperson, Public Investment Committee, on the 22nd report on audited financial statement for state corporations. That this House adopts the 22nd report of the Public Investment Committee on audited financial statements for state corporations laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, November 6th, 2018. The County Pension Scheme Bill, National Assembly Bill number 49 of 2017 by the Honorable Muriuki Njagagwa, member for Mbeere North, will be debated. The time allocated there is 1 hour 15 minutes. The debate on this had already begun, and it was interrupted on Wednesday, November 14th, 2018. The principal object of this bill is to establish the county pension scheme as a mandatory, and the quorum has been achieved. Now the business of the House will begin.
Now we have quorum, and therefore order will begin.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
In that particular order, I'm told the Chair, Cohesion, Honorable Commander, has something to lay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Order members, I hear an unparliamentary language to my right. And the members, we might want to have them substantiate. Now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to read the following papers on the table of this House today. Tuesday, November 20th, 2018, report of Select Committee of National Cohesion and Equal Opportunities. 1, Mr. Speaker, on the 11th session of the Conference of Status of Parties to the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities held in United Nations headquarters on 12th to 14th June 2018. 2, Mr. Speaker, the Global Peace Leadership Conference held in Kampala, Uganda on 1st to 3rd August 2018. And that, Mr. Speaker, the benchmarking visit to Indonesia on 23rd to 27th July 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Honorable Commander again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House notes the report of the Select Committee on National Cohesion and Equal Opportunities on 11th session of the Conference of Status of Parties on the Convention of the Right of Persons with Disability, held in United Nations headquarters on 12th to 14th June 2018, laid on the table of this House today, Wednesday, 21st November 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
Yes, we will start with the questions as is normal. And therefore, we'll start with the first member to pose a question. That is Honorable Clement Muturi Kigano, member for Kangema.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 047. It is directed to the Attorney General. When will the government resolve the dispute between Kenya and Uganda on Migingo Island, including instituting legal proceedings before the East African Court of Justice.
By the Attorney General. The next one is by the member for Kajiado Central Constituency, Honorable Elijah Memusi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to ask the Cabinet Secretary for Health.
What question is it?
Honorable Speaker, this is question number 188 of 2018. I beg to ask the Cabinet Secretary for Health the following questions. A, explain why there is a shortage of cancer drugs despite the fact that cancer is a national concern. And B, what measures has the ministry put in place to ensure availability and adequate supply of cancer drugs in all public health facilities? And C, could the ministry consider making available free cancer screening services in all public health facilities? I thank you.
Very well. That particular question will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Health. Next is the member for Tharaka, Honorable George Gitonga Murugara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is serial number 185 of 2018, directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. A, is the Cabinet Secretary aware of claims of the Kenya police officers at Marimanti Police Station engaging in vices that include corruption, illegal erection of roadblocks with the aim of obtaining bribes from motorists, border cyclists, and other road users, and general harassment of citizens? Number B, what action is the ministry taking against these police officers, and in particular, the officer commanding police station at Marimanti Police Station for condoning and engaging in the above vices? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security. And next will be the member for Kwanza, Honorable Ferdinand Wanyonyi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question 189. The question is the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture and Livestock. Question is the Cabinet Secretary aware that the Agriculture, Fisheries, Food and Authority, that's AFA, does not have a substantive board of directors, and further, that the Secretariat is on temporary terms of service? B, when will the said board be gazetted? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well, and that one will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Agriculture and Livestock. Next is Honorable Catherine Waruguru, member for Laikipia County.
I'm going to ask question number 190/2018. When will the Cabinet Secretary consider facilitating issuance of title deeds to persons residing in Liki, Majengo, Solio villages in Nanyuki, Minor village in Nanyuki, Kandutura village in Rumuruti County? Question B, what steps has the ministry taken to resettle squatters at Kwambuzi land area near Kenya Defense Forces Garrison Army Barracks in Nanyuki? Thank you.
Very well, and that will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Lands. Next is Honorable Dr. James Kipkosgei Murgor, member for Keio North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask question 192 of 2018, directed at the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Housing. And the question is, what action is the ministry taking to ensure that the high number of road accidents reported along Iten Cabernet Road, and in particular at Kolol area, where a total of 13 accidents leading to 6 deaths have occurred in the last 10 months? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. That one will be answered to or replied to before the Transport Public Works and Housing Committee. The last one is the one by Honorable Safia S. Adan, member for Marsabit County. See, the problem is your code is close to the background you are standing. So do you have your card there? Yes, you can use the mic in front of you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, my question is question 193/2018. What measures is the ministry putting in place to the causes that...
I do not know if you are actually going on record because it doesn't seem that your mic is working. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Proceed.
What measure is the ministry putting in place to ensure that the root cause of tribal conflict in Marsabit County are addressed, and including settling the people who are displaced?
Very well. That will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security. That marks the end of the questions. What is your point of order, Honorable Jomo Washiali?
Chair, I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity, and also commend that we are doing very well in terms of asking questions, but as a House, we are doing poorly in terms of supplementary questions, Mr. Speaker. And that's why you will find many questions coming up that are more or less similar in nature. Mr. Speaker, a question that has been put by the Honorable Member for Tharaka constituency about police mounting necessary roadblocks. This is a very common aspect, Mr. Speaker, and many of us have had that experience. And I was just going to request, Mr. Speaker, that in this House, we already have a communication from your chair that before a member gets to another committee as a friend, he must get the permission of that chair. Mr. Speaker, that is denying quite a number of us to participate in the session to raise issues under supplementary question. And also, Mr. Speaker, the venues that are provided by Parliament are also inhibiting because they are small, and sometimes even as members who would want to ask supplementary questions, we may not have space to sit.
I think you are not being fair at all, Honorable Ashiali. I think you are not being fair. And, well, of course, I see your real interest in this question time.
Yes.
Well, if it is an issue of space in Parliament, you know you are in the leadership yourself. So these are issues that issues that can be canvassed at the House Business Committee, which you are part of its membership. Number two, Honorable Washiali, if you look at what Honorable Member for the Raqqa constituency is asking, it's specific to his constituency. You can see it is not a generalized one. He's speaking to the police officers at Marimanti police station. Now, and he's right. You can also ask yours. If you ask one from Mumias East or West, it does not in any way conflict with this particular one. It might be a general policy if he was asking a traffic policy in Kenya. But he's asking very specific question. So he's right. Now, in terms of also members attending committees and asking supplementary questions, I would be very happy to, to get complaints of members who've gone to particular committees and have been refused permission to ask supplementary questions. Because we would have fairly reasonable, but I think they can be sorted out in the manner I've just indicated. So please, I've heard you. We will try and create mechanisms for members to ask supplementary questions, but the members are themselves supposed to be the ones asking those supplementary questions. We'll only give them an opportunity to if they really require that. So let's proceed. I've heard you. What is it again, Honorable Waititi?
Mr. Speaker, whatever you're answering to Honorable Washeri is something that he had asked again. This is the second time, Mr. Speaker, you have answered that question. I know you have forgotten, but it's in records. So I don't know what he's looking for.
Okay,
when members of parliament are asking questions.
If the position you've just indicated is true, and I have no reason not to trust you, then it means actually Honorable Ashiali is himself violating the very same thing which he's complaining against. That, you know, the questions are being, there are questions which are similar being posed to committees and CSS. If that is the case, then you have actually violated it yourself. You are not coming to the House with very clean hands. So let's proceed anyway. I mean, honorable members, I do not think that is a matter we really need to trash too much. So let's proceed. Next order.
Order number 8, procedural motion, exemption of business from the provision of Standing Order 43.
Honorable Leader of Majority Party.
Chair, I beg to move that this House orders the business appearing as order number 10 in the order paper be exempted from the provisions of Standing Order number 40, subsection 3, being a Wednesday morning, a day allocated for business, not sponsored by the majority or minority party, or business sponsored by a committee. Mr. Speaker, the House Business Committee last night in our sitting approved this procedural motion. And if you look at order number 10, is on the 22nd report on audited financial statements for state corporation from the Public Investment Committee. And because we have until 6th of December to conclude this year's session, the House Business Committee felt that this report is important. Then we have the Public Accounts Committee report, which is also very, very important, and that we can give it a slot so that this matter of the audited accounts is dealt with as an important to the country and to the House. So this was just a procedural motion. Then this afternoon, of course, we will continue with the gender bill. And Mr. Speaker, I heard a member of parliament this morning on a radio, and he's very much obsessed with the name Aden Duale. And he was saying that Aden Duale, what he's saying is not what he believes in. And I asked him, the only person who can read my heart is my wife and the Almighty God. And from where I sit, he cannot be my wife, so he should keep off my matters. And it's very, very cheap, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move and ask the leader of minority to second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second this motion. Ordinarily, this is basically a procedural motion, Mr. Speaker, because there are some, like order number 10, Mr. Speaker, is a report on audited financial statement brought to this House by Public Investment Committee. Mr. Speaker, we want the House to allow us to debate those issues or those motions that are not brought by private members. And by the way, it is only one this morning. And this House has complained previously that Public Accounts Committee and Public Investment Committees were not submitting their reports. Now that we have their reports in this House, we want to start with the Public Investment Committee this week, and next week we will deal with the Public Accounts Committee. I want to thank those two committees for at least honoring their obligation and bringing their reports. I second, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. And I propose a question which is at the... Oh, and who is this? So I propose a question which is that this House orders that the business appearing as order number 10 in the order paper be exempted from provisions of Standing Order 43, being a Wednesday morning, a day allocated for business not sponsored by majority or minority party, or business sponsored by a committee. I will put the question which is that this House orders that the business appearing as order number 10 in the order paper be exempted from provisions of Standing Order 43, being a Wednesday morning, a day allocated for business not sponsored by majority or minority party, or business sponsored by a committee. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Many as of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 9, the County Pension Scheme Bill, National Assembly Bill number 49 of 2017, second reading.
On this particular one, we are resuming debate, and the balance of time is 1 hour and 15 minutes. And honorable members who have contributed, you know the standing orders do not allow you to contribute a second time in this particular one. So, just a minute. Since there was nobody who had a balance on the floor, I will give the gentleman top on the list, Honorable Iringo Kubai, member for Igembe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this bill. And I thank my colleague, Honorable Jagagwe, for bringing this bill to this House. And I stand to support it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a pension fund is very important for any citizen or anybody who has been working throughout his life or our life. And Mr. Speaker, it is very prudent that a pension fund is established for every sector of the people who are working in this country, so that at least once one retires, you have something to go home with. Mr. Speaker, it is very heartening when somebody retires and there has been no pension which has been put into place, and when you go home, you have nothing to do, you have no income, and you just live like a pauper. I remember, Mr. Speaker, even when we were debating here the other day, we were talking about a pension for even parliamentarians. And when we talk of pension for when somebody leaves the parliament and you don't have any backup, or you did not have any money to keep you going, you just walk with the streets and you look as if you have never even worked for this country, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, those members of our society who are staff of our county governments, they need it as much as everybody else needs it. Therefore, it is a bright idea to bring this one forward, so that at least the employer, that is the county government, and the pensioner or the worker himself or herself, gives in some pools into an account, whereby when one retires, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, you are given some lump sum, an amount which you will carry home, and more so, you will be getting a remuneration on monthly basis, at least to keep you going, and also your family, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in as much as we are supporting this one, it should also be structured, and this bill, I've gone through it, it has the structures of management. The establishment of a trustee, which will oversee this one, is a very important one, and those people who will be elected or nominated as the trustees, they must be vetted properly, so that you can have people of good moral standings who will not embezzle or who will take care of these funds, and to check on misappropriation like we have been seeing in many other sectors, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the centralized format which has been proposed by this bill, a very prudent way of managing the funds, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, more so, once these funds are put together, they can also be even invested. And the board has got that mandate to invest in this money, to create more funds. And these funds, Mr. Speaker, can be always disbursed to the pensioners. And when one retires, Mr. Speaker, you live a happy life as when you are in your working life. I support you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. If members can speak that brief, because really I think the matters are the same. Honorable Bayaya.
Yes,
Honorable Bayaya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Well, I stand here to oppose this bill from the first place because it's on record that Parliament already passed a similar bill, a bill which has journeyed through the process of Parliament up to Senate level. Today, someone else or another member brings up a similar bill with other issues put in there to confuse the whole process, but which we know at the end of the day that there are vested interests within this bill that we are processing here today. So to anchor the integrity of Parliament, that Parliament should not be used by interested people and cartels and other such people, I think this House needs to make a statement. And the statement is that this bill does not pass until Senate finishes with the other bill. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would urge members here to continue to respect that Parliament needs to be for parliamentarians and not to bring in vested interests that at the end of the day makes the whole parliament system in this country look like it's not serious. We have a bill, a similar bill at Senate, and that bill needs to complete its journey until it is disposed of. We know whether it will pass or not, and then we can now have another bill coming in. But we can't have two processes that aim at doing the same thing. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Next on the list is the Honorable Mohammed Sheikh.
Who was saying point of order?
I withdraw.
Honorable Mohammed Sheikh. Honorable Mohammed Sheikh.
I withdraw, Chair, Speaker. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay. Then Honorable Mutua Barasa. Mutua Barasa. Yeah, then this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That is not a familiar name, but proceed anyway.
I rise to support this bill, creating a universal pension scheme to manage all the county government, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker, creating a universal, some kind of retirement benefits pension scheme is good because for issues of management and auditing for compliance. This bill also seeks to cure the very disease that has been bedeviling the county government for a very long time, where county governments deduct such contributions from the workers, but they do not remit to the retirement schemes. It seeks to provide punitive measures and also exploring ways of recovering this money and delivering them into those schemes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is very important because it also provides some value additions to ensure that all the county government workers are going to get life insurance policy covers for themselves. And whether we have another bill in the Senate, this House conducts its business, and that matter will be handled at that level, Mr. Speaker. This is going to revolutionize and reform the pension sectors of this country, Mr. Speaker, because we must comply with all the laws, and we must also ensure that we have a framework that we will ensure that the money that the employees are deducted finds their way with the pensioner. For these very few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. Thank you.
Honorable Sankok.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I'm donating my time to Honorable.
Honorable Wanjira Wangari, you are out of order. Completely out of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise from the beginning to support this bill. And private members' bill, Mr. Speaker, is never an easy thing to do. I know Honorable Jagagua had worked very thoroughly on this bill, but how it comes to the floor is another issue. But Mr. Speaker, now that it is here, I want to say that it's not a new issue to me. We dealt with it in the Senate in the 11th Parliament. I was the Vice Chair of the Labour Committee, and we went through the motions that actually had approved this bill for publication. Then it was tabled in the House, but of course died with the term before it came to the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the issue of county pensions is very important. In fact, this bill is long overdue, it is delayed, and Mr. Speaker has caused a lot of anxiety to the county employees in terms of the executive and the assemblies. And as it is, Mr. Speaker, I would like to refer members to Article 132 of the County Governments Act. And before the enactment of this constitution, it was actually anticipated that there would be an issue of transition of the pensions from the defunct county councils and municipal councils to what is now the new county government. If you read Article 132, Mr. Speaker, you'll see that it says clearly, subject to the transitional provisions herein, all members, officers, and staff of a county government shall subscribe to an existing pension scheme for officers and staff of local government. If you read it together, Mr. Speaker, with Section 49 of the Urban Areas Act and Cities Act 2011, states clearly that officers of a board shall on the commencement of this act subscribe to an existing pension scheme approved by the Retirement Benefits Authority. What that means, Mr. Speaker, is that there is a lot of effort and resources that go to establishing a retirement benefit scheme. And a lot has been put to lab trust, now referred to as the county pension fund, and has been put to lab fund. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the Treasury, the National Treasury, actually issued a circular to actually put this into perspective. And the circular, which is number 18 of 2010, was intended to reinforce the requirements of Article 132 of the County Governments Act and Article 49 of the Urban and Cities Act, Mr. Speaker, of the Cities and Urban Areas Act 2011. Mr. Speaker, you'll agree with me that unless there is a compelling reason for us to do a totally new scheme that will take resources, that will take time, it is very easy for us to actually transition the existing pension fund, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was a technical committee that was formed led by the Retirement Benefits Authority. It encompassed the Treasury, it encompassed actuaries who are actually authorities in these matters. It encompassed the Senate that time, and it also had the representation of the Workers' Union. And that technical committee, Mr. Speaker, sat through for almost 7 months. They actually came up with a directive and what was supposed to be done, Mr. Speaker. The issue of merging the scheme will be almost impossible because every scheme, whether it's lab fund or lab trust, has its own assets, has its liabilities. What is important, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that the transition is clear, the members' benefits are protected, and none of them will be lost in the process. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General, as the legal advisor of government, in 2014, I think, in 2017, issued an advisory. This advisory, Mr. Speaker, read, and I will quote, "The lab trust, that is into brackets umbrella, retirement fund, the county pension fund, is the existing pension scheme for officers and staff of the defunct local governments as envisaged under Section 132 of the County Governments Act." There has not been a contrary advisory sought from the Attorney General to be able to negate this fact, Mr. Speaker. What that means, Mr. Speaker, if you read that advisory, he actually goes ahead and says, it is important that this is anchored, the lab trust is anchored under an act of parliament. What does that mean, Mr. Speaker? It means then it will operate under the law, it will actually be checked and regulated under the law, and more importantly, Mr. Speaker, who are then submitted a memorandum in support of the bill that time, as it is right now, and they issued a circular dated 19th September 2014, of which we scrutinized, Mr. Speaker. And if you look at the bill right now, Schedule 3, you'll actually be able to see the sponsoring agencies, Mr. Speaker. That time, the county governments were about 43. Right now, I can see that almost every county government agrees and actually is a sponsor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, the associated organizations are clearly enumerated in the bill. That is the workers' unions, the county government's workers' union, the water companies that are localized in the counties. And Mr. Speaker, this has taken a lot of consultations. It's not just something that has sprung up from nowhere. I can tell you that because I was in the process. And Mr. Speaker, initially, and as has been, the defunct county councils were use it to 7.5%. Mr. Speaker, we should be encouraging workers to be able to improve their savings in terms of pension. Because if you don't have it, Mr. Speaker, what that encourages is poverty, what it encourages is dependency, and actually uncertainty in terms of the futures of these workers, Mr. Speaker. There are more than 45,000 workers, Mr. Speaker, who are actually members of this fund. And my proposal, Mr. Speaker, in joining with what is in the Senate right now, is that maybe, just as the national government works, we should have two separate schemes. One for the executive, as it is in the Pensions Act. Every other civil servant in the national government is under the Pensions Act. But we have a specific pension arrangement for the legislature, that is the National Assembly. What is in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, can be able to be transitioned to accommodate all the workers that work under the county assemblies. But this bill, Mr. Speaker, will be able to cover the county governors and the county executives with their teams, so that we are able to separate and reduce the collisions and the friction that there is, Mr. Speaker. But I want to congratulate Honorable Jagagwa, because this bill will be able to deal with all those transition issues. The board that has been put in place is clearly enumerated to how it will be appointed. The only amendment I would want to suggest, maybe at the third reading, is that when we are talking the representatives, Mr. Speaker, when we say a representative of the county government to be appointed by the cabinet secretary, I think that will bring an issue of conflict. Let the council of governors be able to send their own representative independently. Let the Public Service Commission be able to send their representation through the cabinet secretary, but not appointed by the cabinet secretary. Let the representative of the county assembly boards be able to send their representative through the cabinet assembly, through the cabinet secretary, but not appointed by the cabinet secretary. What that will mean, Mr. Speaker, is that we'll be able to protect the integrity of every institution as has been given this bill. It also has an issue on Sharia compliance. That, Mr. Speaker, I remember we debated it then, and I still think it's a good idea. It was brought by the specific practitioners of the Muslim faith, and they felt that the current pension schemes do not take care of their interests as Sharia, as the Muslims and in their faith. And Mr. Speaker, having to protect their interests, this has a whole section on it and has been incorporated to a team to actually go through it and make sure that it is Sharia compliant. I think that's a plus to this bill. But the underlining, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to actually enact this law as quickly as possible. But more importantly, let us separate the schemes, to have the executive separate from the assemblies, to be able to mirror what there is in the national government for the legislature and for the national executive. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Very well. Honorable Makali Mulu.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me also add my voice into this important bill. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I support this bill. Initially, Mr. Speaker, I was opposed to the procedure because, Mr. Speaker, I felt like as a house, we discussed all these issues, we had agreed they are important to this country, and we had passed them. And Mr. Speaker, I think we need to pass the message very clearly. It is not the work of the National Assembly to push the Senate to do their work. If the bill has been lying in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, for some time, this is the reason why Muriuki is bringing this bill. Because we passed the bill for the Senate to do their work, and we have an act of parliament so that the workers can get their pension. But now, up to now, we don't have anything called act of parliament, Mr. Speaker. So to me, I support this, because if this is going to push the Senate to conclude the other one, Mr. Speaker, then we'll be home and dry. And I've said, Mr. Speaker, because the two bills, the County Retirement Benefits Bill and this County Pension Bill, are almost, Mr. Speaker, similar in terms of the intentions, Mr. Speaker. There will be need at some point to make sure that all the good things from this bill and all the good things which we had approved in the earlier bill, Mr. Speaker, are harmonized. So that at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we have one law which takes care of the county governments. And Mr. Speaker, looking at this bill, because we all know the benefits of pension, Mr. Speaker, as workers, there is nothing an employer can give you at the end of the day which is better than a pension, Mr. Speaker. Because you'll be able to draw the pension till you die,
And to some extent, even your family members might benefit after you die, Mr. Speaker, for a period of about 5 years. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no question whether this law makes sense or it doesn't make sense. It is good law. And I think what we are discussing, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of when are we going to have this law in place so that the county governments can start now enjoying the benefits of this law. And that's why I support this, because I supported the earlier one, but it's still stuck somewhere in the Senate. And, Mr. Speaker, I really don't know. When you look at the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, the work of the Senate is to take care of the interests of the counties. So, Mr. Speaker, you know when you marry a wife, you promise her that you will take care, and the wife promises that she will take care of the husband. And because you have an agreement that you will take care of me and I will take care of you, you go that extra mile to make sure that you take care of your wife, and she goes extra mile to make sure that she takes care of you as a husband. Now, the law says the Senate exists to support and make sure that the interests of the counties are properly protected and promoted, Mr. Speaker. And then the person who is supposed to promote those interests is the person sitting on the interest, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, when Kenyans say at times that this house, we need to look at the functions and the importance of it, I think they might be justified, Mr. Speaker. So I want to plead with the Senate, Mr. Speaker, that they get over this law. Honorable Wangari has just said they spend so much time discussing this bill. And here we are discussing it again, wasting precious time of this house. But now that they have not enacted that law, I want to say we have a reason also to discuss this. And I want to support Mr. Speaker. And say I've looked at the bill, and there are some good things, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, pension schemes normally are supposed to be, the funds are supposed to be invested so that you generate more money, and at the end of the day, the workers benefit more. And when you look at this bill, Mr. Speaker, it makes very clear provisions in terms of fund managers, fund administrators. It makes clear provision about the county pension fund, so that at the end of the day, these funds are invested which in areas which provide or which confirm highest returns, Mr. Speaker. And as a result of that, then the workers will be able to draw, when they retire, higher returns as a result of investing the funds. So when you look through, Mr. Speaker, also the bill makes provision where what we call personal liability of those who will be overseeing this bill are being protected. And to me, these are best practices when you consider pension schemes, Mr. Speaker. At one point, I was a trustee of a pension scheme, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, if properly managed, workers of the county governments and county assemblies will be able to benefit very much as a result of this bill if we enact it.
To contribute. Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. And Mr. Speaker, we have two houses, the Senate and the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and every house should do its work, Mr. Speaker, not to be pushed. This bill has been there for quite some time, Mr. Speaker, and we expected the Senate to have finished with it, Mr. Speaker. But sometimes, Mr. Speaker, the public has also observed outside there that that is why they say that they do duplication of work for the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I don't know, but that should not be there. Mr. Speaker, the process of this pension scheme, Mr. Speaker, is to make people of the county to benefit, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it is very important, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the MP who brought this bill, Mr. Speaker, so that we can deliberate on it and make sure that our people benefit with this bill, Mr. Speaker. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Thank you very much. So before I give the next member to speak, let me recognize in the speakers gallery students from St. Austin Academy from Dagoretti South in Nairobi. Thank you very much. Now, coming to my left, I will give Honorable Sotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this bill. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I oppose this bill because we cannot allow Parliament to be used to legislate on matters which are clearly canvassing for business, for personal interest. Mr. Speaker, I'm saying this because this bill was rejected by the National Treasury. Because the National Treasury is the institution responsible for matters relating to management and regulation of pension schemes in Kenya. And it had objections to this bill. The National Treasury is responsible for policy decision on retirement benefit and related financial services as enshrined in the Public Finance Management Act.
Honorable members, especially the mover of the motion, really you want to hear what your colleagues are saying, and then you'll be able to respond and you'll have an opportunity. So when I see you really wanting to, I really don't think it's the right thing. But just listen to the members, you will have an opportunity to, you will be replying. So you will clear any issues that you have problems with. Now, and Honorable Wamalwa, you'll be next speaking. So why would you really want to interfere with your colleague who is on the floor? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for protecting me. I was saying that it is important for this House to note.
And for you, Honorable Member for Gilgit, you've just spoken. So keep your peace. Allow other members to also say something. You said yours in peace. Proceed.
It is important to note that the National Treasury is an important institution on matters to do with finance and retirement schemes. And that is anchored in the Public Finance Management Act. So if National Treasury has an objection to this bill, who are we as Parliament to pass it? We must question it. And Mr. Speaker, even the stakeholders appeared before the Finance and Planning Committee and raised objection on this bill. The MCS, who have a major stake on matters relating to pension, relating to counties, had an objection. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes to dissolve LAB Fund. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that the LAB Fund as a public institution, as a parastatal, there is procedures on dissolution of state corporation. We do not have any advisory from the State Corporation Advisory Committee on the issue of dissolution of LAB Fund. But this bill is proposing under clause 42 to dissolve LAB Fund, and is also biased in favor of LAB Trust. And LAB Trust, this House must interrogate LAB Trust, because this bill tries to sanitize activities of various private companies that are run under LAB Trust. And I will mention the companies: CPF Financial Services, LAB Trust Administration Services, LASA Property Management Company, LASA Insurance Brokers, LAB Trust Infrastructure and Technology, and the LAB Trust Umbrella Scheme, among others. This is unacceptable, that we want to run a private company using public resources. This House has passed a bill that is before Senate on similar issues. We cannot again come here and purport to discuss a bill which is basically addressing the same issues that this House has discussed and is before Senate. If anything, they should bring amendments on the bill before Senate. Mr. Speaker, this bill under class 21.
What's your point of order? What's your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this. Is a member in order, Mr. Speaker, to mislead this House that this bill was rejected by the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, during the public hearings, the Treasury representative, none other than the CS, came and gave his opinion, and he never rejected it. There's a report in this House, Mr. Speaker, and that report from the Finance Committee does not reject this bill. Mr. Speaker, you made a ruling last week. Mr. Speaker, you made a ruling last week. It's unfortunate that these members were not here, where you said that this bill has to be canvassed. It's not a matter of us going to the Senate, Mr. Speaker. So is a member in order to mislead this House. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Njagagwa, I will allow Honorable Sosi to continue as I check from records what you have said, and it's true that we rule that this matter should go on, and therefore the members will take their decision. You will make your decision, honorable members. It is not up to the Speaker to decide for you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in possession of the report by the Departmental Committee on Finance and Planning, where the Treasury had reservations. And if I can quote part of the report, Treasury said this bill goes against the recommendation of the Interagency Technical Committee that recommended the establishment of a new scheme, close the existing ones, begin afresh without liabilities, and have a scheme that will be run independently. That is submission by the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, under clause 21 of this bill, it proposes that this pension scheme will be administered by an internal administrator. Mr. Speaker, this is unnecessary, bureaucratic, and costly to administer the scheme. Mr. Speaker, for those few...
Mr. Speaker, this is a house of debate. It's not a house of rumors, Mr. Speaker. And for an honorable member to come here and mislead this House is totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, going through the report, in line with Article 118 of the Constitution, there's no way a bill can be allowed to come to the second reading, Mr. Speaker, without the committee report on public participation. I've been reading this keenly, and when you go through this, Mr. Speaker, particularly on the executive summary, in the public participation that was done by this committee, Mr. Speaker, you realize that the Local Authority Provident Fund was there, the County Assemblies Forum was there, the Council of Governors was there, Mr. Speaker, and more importantly, the National Treasury was there. And there's nowhere in the report, Mr. Speaker, that shows that National Treasury had rejected this report. It is not proper for a honorable member to come to this floor and mislead. You must table facts, Mr. Speaker, and that's how people will respect you. This is a house of debate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why I support this, I have documents here, Mr. Speaker, that I should be able to table, Mr. Speaker. We know very well people, when they get retired, Mr. Speaker, they become so vulnerable. I see honorable members of parliament who retired, or maybe one way or another they were rejected. They are languishing in poverty and disease, Mr. Speaker. The pension fund is very critical. And going through the report, Mr. Speaker, I have here where it shows, and this is in line with what Honorable Wangare had said. And Honorable Wangare, she's formerly in the Senate, and she had handled this matter, and this is in line with Section 132 of the County Government Act, Mr. Speaker, whereby it's recognizing lab trusts as the umbrella body, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we should look for a way of harmonizing this, Mr. Speaker. Such an incident happened last time, Mr. Speaker, when I proposed a bill of the political parties fund. So as we move on, we can be able to harmonize and see what to do, Mr. Speaker. Already, Mr. Speaker, this scheme is already existing. It will be a waste of resources, Mr. Speaker, to come and start a new one. But when there's a difference, Mr. Speaker, in line with our standing orders, there's a provision for mediation. And I've just been consulting my leader here as we move forward. Because the other bill has not been debated yet in the Senate, we can look for a framework how they can come together for purposes of improvement so that we move together in a harmonized manner, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I looked at the board composition as pertains this bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes a board.
the Board of Trustees, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have a representatives of the Council of Governors, Mr. Speaker, the Public Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, the County Public Service Boards, the County Assembly Service Boards, and we're also going to have other nominees from the county government. This shows the board, Mr. Speaker, it is all-inclusive. On matters of pension, Mr. Speaker, you must have an all-inclusive board that will represent the different stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. I'm requesting honorable members, where there's an issue, we try to harmonize. My friend, Honorable Saronei, whom I respect so much, has just come to me and he has presented a report to me, Mr. Speaker, that this was rejected. Authentic, and it cannot see the light of the House, Mr. Speaker. Currently, as I speak, as I debate now, I have a report which was approved for tabling by Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi. I showed my friend, Mr. Speaker, he doubted this. So you need also to tell us whether this is the proper signature. We want to know which is the right report.
Please.
Because the report I have...
Please, Honorable Wamalwa, the direction you are taking is not very good.
Thank you.
For you. So I want you to proceed. You are arguing and supporting, and that was good.
Thank you very much.
But don't ask me to get involved in your debate, because if I do...
Thank you very much for the guidance, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General is the chief legal advisor of government, Mr. Speaker. When I speak, Mr. Speaker, here, I can see the circular which was given by the AG, recognizing lab trust as an umbrella body, Mr. Speaker. Unless the advice was wrong, and I'm ready to table this to show that lab trust is recognized as an umbrella pension body for the county government, Mr. Speaker. What we need to take into consideration are the transition clauses, so that the people at the county government level, Mr. Speaker, can have a pension scheme that is going to take care of their interests, especially when they retire, especially at the elderly age, because that's the age that they are vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. I'm humbly requesting the honorable members who are here today to support this bill, because I can see this bill is the one which is going to provide value, going to provide solution to the county government pension scheme, Mr. Speaker. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support. I thank you.
I then give the member for Tigania West, Mutunga Kunyidhia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, after so much heat, I would like to try and moderate this situation. Mr. Speaker, I think one of the provisions that this bill is bringing to the arrangement is that this creates an opportunity for the people to get their pensions managed centrally across the counties in this country. It is an important step further in enhancing devolution. It is basically righting the wrongs and further implementation of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the counties drew officers from all over the country. And most of this they drew are people who are already moving towards their retirement age. There is need for us to have provisions that are reliable and dependable, provisions that they will be able to rely on. And this particular bill, having gone through it, Mr. Speaker, provides that particular platform. Mr. Speaker, I would like to mention just one thing concerning the two institutions that are being mentioned in this House. What this bill presupposes, and I've read very carefully, Mr. Speaker, is that it's creating a new institution called the County Pension Scheme. The County Pension Scheme is an institution that is going to merge the two and create sanity in what has been happening. Mr. Speaker, it does not seem to give one prominence against the other. Mr. Speaker, if you look at what has been happening in this country, retirees are the greatest sufferers when it comes to management of their issues. And in most cases, you realize that some of them may not have been prepared enough to be able to start a life after retirement. And therefore, a reliable pension scheme is important, although we need to draw caution on some of the provisions in this bill. The bill provides for the fund to be invested somewhere else. It's not very clear where the money, the proceeds, or rather the revenue from the investment is going to be used. So we would like probably to propose that this money goes back to Treasury for purposes of increasing as appropriation in end. Mr. Speaker, looking at the architecture of the scheme itself, it seems to be quite promising that it will deliver what is required to be delivered across the country in all the counties. So the bill stands a chance to resolve the problems that are existing right now. Passing such a law, Mr. Speaker, will give the confidence to the county workers at all levels, and therefore will enable them to to receive their money after retirement. Mr. Speaker, one of the problems that we have also realized in this country is payment to the aged. Not necessarily linking it to this bill, but I think there is need for us to be looking at that a lot more carefully. Those who are over 70 years have received a lot of problems, or rather have a lot of problems today to get their money. This scheme needs to resolve such problems to make sure that it is smooth and easy to access the money. Mr. Speaker, with those very few remarks, I support.
We will proceed. I see Honorable Waruguru, member for Laikipia.
If you allow me, Speaker, I will donate my minutes. You allow me to contribute in the next motion. Thank you.
So I'll give honorable members, please, let's allow members to debate. And then I can see through your eyes, Honorable Minority Leader. So let me give Honorable Muturi Kigano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, this being a private member's bill, it is fairly dishonest for any member to try to, with a lot of respect, to try and discourage private members' effort. Mr. Speaker, it is also important that whoever stands opposed to this bill takes opportunity to read the memorandum accompanying this bill. I have gone through it, I have perused through, and it is also very well researched by the honorable sponsor. Mr. Speaker, this bill and the law in it is long overdue. Long overdue because since the defunct county governments, there has not been any other initiative to cater for the staffers of county governments. The bill is in tandem with Agenda 4 in our vision. It also augments other efforts like NSSF in catering for our brothers and sisters in county governments. It is a major shift. It is a major shift. It demonstrates a major shift towards achieving a welfare society. Mr. Speaker, it will also try to ward off discrimination because our brothers who also and sisters who work in public service feel discriminated. And equally, Mr. Speaker, the bill is geared to building capital that is essential for our development and Agenda 4. It is a bit fallacious to hear a member saying that there are some cartels trying to get this capital. This, if you go through the bill, you will see that the money is audited, provision is for audit is there, provision for running the scheme is there, and there are also tribunals. So with those few remarks, I support.
The Honorable Gitonga, member for Tharaka.
What is coming later? What is coming later? It's okay. Sorry. But you
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion, and especially because it is a private member's bill, and it is a policy and practice of this House to encourage private members to bring bills. Mr. Speaker, there has been a ruling that this bill proceeds to debate and to conclusion, and therefore we are within our rights to stand to either support or oppose the bill. I do not think we should have any objections because those matters have already been decided on, and therefore it is for the House to decide whether the bill passes or does not pass. This is a very important bill establishing the county pensions scheme. These are schemes that will run through the 47 counties of the Republic, and they will be especially beneficial to the employees of the county. It is elaborate in terms of establishment of the pension scheme. It is also elaborate on how the scheme is going to be managed, and this is very important. We are aware of schemes that have been established, which schemes have not been run properly, which schemes have always been under scrutiny by the Retirement Benefits Authority, and even there have been schemes which have been cancelled because of mismanagement. These are public funds which must be taken care of through appropriate legislation. And that legislation is what we have before the House through the effort of a private member. Let me talk about the importance of a pension scheme to members of the county governments. It goes without gainsaying that, in fact, there have been dismissals in most of the counties. When a new regime comes in, it gets into a wanton process of dismissing employees, some with reason, others without reason, some fairly, others unfairly. These employees have found themselves in the streets without a job one day, and it is important if these employees had a scheme to which to fall back to. We know that there have been cases of litigation in the counties regarding dismissals, and some of those cases have actually ended in a manner that is unfair to employees who have found themselves destitute. It is because of this destitution that we as a House should come to the aid of employees of county governments so that they have a fallback position where they will have a pension to resort to just in case they found themselves jobless. But it is also important to say that county governments should be discouraged from sacking, dismissing, or in any manner terminating employment of employees in manners that are not fair and just. It is not fair, it cannot be just that when a new regime takes over a county government, the first business of that county would be to go into the employees employed to try and replace them either as ghost workers or workers that are incompetent or workers that were not properly employed with new employees. Those new employees possibly are recruited on the basis of either political or personal inclination. This is a practice that we should all frown against and we should discourage. And this is why we are saying, because it is inevitable that employees of the county governments may find themselves in such scenarios, then it is important that we have a properly set up pension scheme that will cushion them against such malpractices. It is those few remarks that I do support this bill and urge members to pass the same. Thank you.
The Honorable Alago Oluoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to support this bill by Honorable Nyagagwa, and in doing so, I want to say that the level of legislative draftsmanship that has gone into the bill is excellent. Mr. Speaker, I've heard members talk about this bill, and I want to give the House the benefit of institutional memory that I have. I had the privilege of serving in the 10th Parliament after the promulgation of the Constitution in 2010, and when the county governments came into force, Mr. Speaker, our problem in the 10th Parliament was how do we ensure that the pension schemes, the annuities, and all the others that had been mismanaged by the counties, by the municipal councils, the county councils, and the city council were safeguarded. To do that, Mr. Speaker, we came up first in 2011 with the Urban Areas Act and the Cities Act, 2011. In 2012, we created the County Governments Act in the 10th Parliament. And again in that act, Mr. Speaker, we inserted Section 132 deliberately. And it reads, all members, officers, and staff of a county government shall subscribe to an existing pension scheme for officers and staff of a local government. Mr. Speaker, these two provisions were meant to protect workers whose salaries were being deducted to go to pension schemes, but were not being remitted to pension schemes. And at the end of it, staff would retire at 65 or 60, and they would have nothing to go home with. It was a very painful experience. Mr. Speaker, you can imagine all of us here, young or old, at some stage, you will have to retire. If you retire at 65 or 70, and you go home without anything, within 2 years, you will die, I can assure you. Out of frustration, out of stress. So these two provisions in the Cities Act and the County Governments Act were meant to safeguard the interests of the workers. Mr. Speaker, in setting up this bill, I noticed the Attorney General has actually approved. I also noticed, Mr. Speaker, that the Treasury, in Circular number 18 of 2010, also gave directive as follows. In particular, you notice that it's critical for the captioned scheme, the LAP Trust Umbrella Retirement Scheme, which is expected to act as an umbrella scheme for the county governments when they establish their retirement benefit scheme. Mr. Speaker, the Treasury gave that directive, having looked at all the circumstances surrounding the issue of pension for staff of county governments. Mr. Speaker, there have been a tug-of-war that's ended up in court between LAP Trust and LAP Fund. What I see in this bill, Mr. Speaker, is an attempt to reconcile those two differences so that the interests of workers of county governments are put under one basket and safeguarded. Mr. Speaker, the amount of investment that LAP Trust has put in place needs to be guarded, because since 2011 up to now, the amount of funds that they have received from workers and which they have invested is quite substantial. If this bill is rejected, it simply means that the amount of investment that has been put into place by LAP Trust will go into disuse and may not come to see the light of day. Mr. Speaker, I notice that members who spoke before me have opposed this bill on the grounds that a similar bill is pending before the Senate. I want to make it categorical that what we have before us in this bill is a pension scheme. What is pending before the Senate is not a pension scheme. It is a provident fund and annuities. And if anybody is doubting what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, consult your actuary. He will explain to you what is meant by a provident fund or an annuity. Mr. Speaker, members or staff of county assemblies are our constituents. We all come from counties.
The Honorable Mbadi, what is out of order?
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to Honorable Lago, I think he's referring to another bill in the Senate which was originated by Honorable Sakaja, if I'm not wrong. The bill we are referring to was introduced in the National Assembly and passed in the National Assembly. And it is about county retirement. It's not about a provident fund. It's a county retirement scheme, which is the same thing as county pension scheme. But it is now in the Senate for concurrence. So the one that Honorable Lago is referring to, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Mbadi.
Yes.
The Honorable Mbadi, you are not addressing the Honorable Lago Watch, you are addressing the House. And in any event, we have this bill before us. We don't have the other one that is wherever it is.
No, but since
so
Honorable Lago referred to
it, it is in order.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to the House not to be misled to think
very well.
that the bill, and I'm sorry if I was addressing Honorable Lago. I think it's just the position of my body. Probably we need to define in the standing orders how you should stand while addressing the House. But I take counsel, and next time I will start looking at you, but addressing an issue which my other colleagues have brought. Thank you, Mr.
The Honorable Olago Watch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is a point of argument, but I take note of it all the same, because I and Mr. Mbadi served in the 10th Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I was going to say that the provisions of this bill is going to cover the interest of workers of counties. And if there's any provision in the bill that we think is not acceptable, let us amend it, but let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Because this bill is very well thought out. Mr. Speaker, in sitting down, I wish to urge my colleagues, honorable members in this House, that let us accept this bill the way it is, but if necessary, let us introduce amendments in the third reading so that we then protect the interests of the workers. Mr. Speaker, I was looking at the gallery, and I see distinguished guests who appear to be older than I am. I'm one of the oldest in the House. They appear to be older than me. I'm sure this concerns them, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, order. I wish to recognize in the public gallery leaders from Gatanga constituency of Muranga County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of Parliament. I will give this opportunity to the Honorable Nyaga Ngata, member for Tharaka Nithi. Oh, she had spoken to this. Very well. The Honorable Fabian Mule. Honorable members, we must be orderly. Those who are...
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Give me a chance.
Honorable members, the Honorable Muli has every right to speak to this because the time allocated for this is still alive. So allow him to also express himself.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and to deliberate on this bill. Honorable Speaker, if you see Article 96, Sub-Article 2, the way the Senate, the major duties participate in making laws and they approve bills which are concerning county government. But the question is, if they don't approve bills which are matters of concern to the Kenyan citizens, what are we supposed to do? If you see this House, Article 95, Sub-Article 2, we are supposed to deliberate matters of concern to our Kenyan citizens. And that's why I'm saying, Honorable Speaker, it is the mandate of this House to bring any matters of concern, whether they are in the Senate or whether they are in which category of discussion. Honorable Speaker, today in this nation, we have schemes, we have program and project which don't have proper policy, we don't have proper bills, we don't have any framework to legislate what is happening. And now, especially when we have the county government, we are talking about schemes. We have schemes which don't have proper laws,
some laws are very not even lying to the Constitution 2010. So that's why I raise and I support this bill. I support this bill on the point that we need to support the existing program of this country to have the laws which give a framework on how it is done. The pension scheme is ongoing. The pension scheme is important, and it will be important when we give uniformity of this scheme across the country. The jurisdiction of Kenya needs schemes which are unified and has the laws which show how it's supposed to be done. And that's why, Honorable Speaker, I stand to support this bill. Thank you.
The Honorable Wanyonyi, what is out of order? The Honorable Kamket, the Honorable Wanyonyi is on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker.
So prosecute you as after his.
Mr. Speaker, I'm standing on the Standing Order 95, and seeing the mood and having contributed to this bill, can we call upon the mover to move and end its page on this one?
Very well, honorable members, just hold.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. But before, Mr. Speaker, I respond, I would wish to donate 5 of my minutes to Honorable Kangogo, 2 minutes. Mr. Honorable Rahim, 2 minutes, and Honorable Kastani, 3 minutes, Mr. Speaker, with your kind permission.
The Honorable Njagagwa.
Yes, sir.
The Honorable Njagagwa, the House has made a decision to give you an opportunity to reply. So kindly proceed to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In response, I wish to state that I wish to thank all the members who have had a chance to respond to. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank all the members who have had a chance to contribute to this bill. Their contribution, Mr. Speaker, has really enriched this bill, and in particular, I would wish to congratulate Honorable Wanyonyi, who noted that persons living with disability should retire actually at 65 years and not at 60, while we had stated that the retirement age of these, the pensioners, the members of this scheme will be at 60 years. Mr. Speaker, I would wish again to comment on one matter that was raised by Honorable Otosi, who says that the main purposes of this bill is actually to assist certain cartels who are supposed or presumed to be running this scheme. Mr. Speaker, he went ahead to mention a few companies, and that is really unparliamentary and procedural because those people do not have the right to respond to what we're saying. And Mr. Speaker, you must appreciate that Article 30 of this bill is very clear that all the monies that will be contributed by the pensioners and the scheme members will be audited by the Auditor General. So, Mr. Speaker, once this will be public funds, which will be exposed to audit every other 1 year by the Auditor General, and Mr. Speaker, therefore, public funds shall not come to waste. Mr. Speaker, like the previous members have spoken, quite a number of them have been in support of this bill, and it is going to assist the retirees once they retire, that they'll have something to fall back to on their 60th year once they retire. Mr. Speaker, of much persuasion to these houses, what is happening now with our previous councillors. Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that every other member has been approached by former councillors in his constituency, and they are seeking that they be paid their pension. And that has happened because when they were in active employment, their previous employers, the local government and the county authorities, were not limiting their pensions. Mr. Speaker, I do not wish, it is not my wish, and that is the main purpose of this bill, that those persons who are currently working now in the counties will have something as a fallback position, as a safety net once they retire. Mr. Speaker, you must appreciate that we have taken care of our brothers in the Muslim world, and that is why we're having a provision, Mr. Speaker, for a Sharia Supervisory Committee that will be advising the board on matters Sharia, that this scheme, Mr. Speaker, will be run in tandem with the Muslim law, that will not have any transgression against the faith and the denomination and of members in the Muslim world. So, Mr. Speaker, it is our hope that this House, and we urge this House, Mr. Speaker, to pass this bill so that the persons and people working in the county governments, Mr. Speaker, are taken care of at once they retire, Mr. Speaker. It wants again to be, basically, Mr. Speaker, it wants to bring in a welfare society in this country, and that is going towards...
Honorable members, consultations, honorable members, it is a given that I can discern that there's a lot of excitement about this particular bill or something else, probably that is coming up later. But I think it is only fair that we give the Honorable Njagagwa an opportunity to prosecute his reply so that he can even hear himself. Honorable members, just give him, it's probably just 2-3 minutes, then you will have this to make your decision. And
thank you, Mr. Speaker, for coming to my aid. There was too much around consultation. Mr. Speaker, again, it is in the bill that if you contribute to this scheme, Mr. Speaker, you are exempt from contributing to NSSF. What does that mean, Mr. Speaker? It means that the members of this scheme will not be exposed to double jeopardy, that they contribute one to NSSF and again to this scheme. So, Mr. Speaker, if you make that election, that you are going purely to contribute to become a member of this scheme, which is a voluntary scheme, Mr. Speaker, and nobody is being forced to contribute money to it, you'll be exempt, Mr. Speaker, from making your contributions to NSSF. Mr. Speaker, as again...
National Assembly Bill number 49 of 2017 be now read a second time. Will as members of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as members of a contrary opinion say nay? Nay. The nays have it. Honorable members, order, 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 order. Honorable members, order. The Honorable Mbadi. Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members, honorable members, we shall make progress. I will direct that the next business be called.
Order number 10, motion, 22nd report on audited financial statement for state corporations.
The chairperson of the Public Investments Committee,
yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like you to...
Those members who are retreating from the House, those members who are crowding the gallery, the Honorable Dawood, the Honorable, the Sergeant at Arms, all those members who are crowding the gallery, if they are making their way out, the Honorable member, I see a member making phone calls.
Pick.
This is outright disrespect to this House. If you want to leave, if you want to retreat from the chambers, do so. But let those who want to prosecute business do so also. The Honorable Member from Vita proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first and foremost thank yourself and just to give a recap of our mandate as a committee. which has been established. Mr. Speaker, if you could protect me from the very, very beautiful ladies.
Yes, the honorable member from
one
Vita,
of them is
you are
honorable, who is
protected.
our member. If they could
These members
consult-
who are crowding here at the dispatch desk, kindly consult in lower tones so that the member from Vita can prosecute the business of this house. But the
Thank you.
honorable member, the honorable chair, kindly prosecute the motion as it is.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker.
The honorable leader of minority, can you advise these members that they can consult somewhere else so that the speaker can hear the member from Vita prosecuting what he needs to do?
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I need to appreciate and thank you for bringing some order. Mr. Speaker, now our mandate as a committee is one, to examine the report and account.
The honorable chair, kindly move fast. Move the motion as it is, then you can say all those other things.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move the motion. This House adopts this report.
The Honorable Nasir, move it as it is in the order paper.
Thank you very much.
Those members
Mr.
who are
Speaker.
standing in the gangways, the Honorable Nyasunya, you said you have a doctor's appointment, but you seem to be having a consultation
He
in the
got well.
corridors, in the gangways of Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that this House adopts the 22nd report of the Public Investment Committee on audited financial statements for state corporations laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, November 6th, 2018. Mr. Speaker, I need to just give a recap, and I will not be taking very long, as much as I am entitled to a whole hour. However, the contents of the report will be able to speak for themselves. And just to give an overview, that this committee, our mandate, as per the Standing Order number 206, is to examine the report and accounts of the public investments, examine the reports, if any, of the Auditor General on the public investment, and thirdly, to examine in the context of the autonomy and efficiency of the public investments, whether the affairs of the public investments are being managed in accordance with sound financial or business principles and prudent commercial practices. Mr. Speaker, this committee began its sitting from February 2018, and so far we were able to hold 91 sittings in which reports of the Auditor General on the accounts of 21 state corporations were examined for various financial years. And in the execution of our mandate, we were guided, Mr. Speaker, by the National Assembly Standing Orders, the Constitution of Kenya, the Kenya Assembly Powers and Privileges Act, Caption 6, the State Corporations Act, Cap 446, the Public Procurement and Disposal Act 2005, and the current one of 2015, Public Procurement and Disposal Regulations 2006, Public Audit Act 2003, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act of 2015, among many others. And in our submissions, we were able to receive our information through both oral and written evidence from chief executive officers of various state corporations and relevant witnesses. And these were issues that had been raised by the Auditor General for the various state corporations, which were found under appropriate sections of the report of each particular state corporation. Mr. Speaker, our observations and recommendations, if taken into account and implemented by this House, will enhance accountability, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, prudent management, commercial viability, and value for money in state corporations and public investment sector as a whole. The record of evidence adduced, documents and notes received by the committee form the basis of the observations and recommendations of the committee as outlined in the report and can be obtained in the minute of the committee proceedings. At this point, Mr. Speaker, allow me to first and foremost congratulate and thank this very, very able committee. And at this juncture, Mr. Speaker, if you'll allow me, I would like to call out the names of these members from my able vice, Honorable Ahmed Abdisalan, Honorable Rashid Kasim, Honorable Joash Nyamache, Honorable Rafael Wanjala, Honorable Omar Mohammed Maalim, Honorable Ahmed Kolosh, Honorable Justice Kizito Mugali, Honorable Thuku Zakari Kwenya, Honorable John Mushiri Nyaga, the Honorable Lady Mary Wamaua Njoroge, Honorable James Kamau Gidhua Mashukuru, Honorable Professor Muhammad Sheikh Muhammad, Honorable Dr. Chrysanthus Wamalwa, who also happens to be our Deputy Whip. At this juncture, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to thank and congratulate my brother, Honorable Tindi Mwale, who was a very, very able and active member of this committee, and equally thank Gideon Mulyungi, who was also a member of this committee prior to this committee being able to do its report. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have been able, as I had said earlier, to do 21 state corporations. And these range from the Geothermal Development Company, the National Social Security Fund, National Health Insurance Fund, Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, Kenya Power and Lighting, National Council for Population Development, the Kenya Institute of Research, Development and Industry, the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company, KETRACO, Kenya Railways Corporation, which we all know has the SGR in it, the Kenya School of Law, the Competition Authority, National AIDS Control Council, the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration, Privatization Commission, National Cereals and Produce Board, Semestea, which is the Center for Mathematics and Science, Kenya Copyrights Board, the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority, the Kenya National Library Service, Jomo Kenyatta Foundation, and TVET. Mr. Speaker, before I go into that we have been able to see in majority of these state corporations. Mr. Speaker, one of them is the issue of delay in appointments of members of boards. A majority of these state corporations, Mr. Speaker, would not have active boards in them. As a result, what transpired was that decisions were being made without board being able to give a proper value for money. And some of these even did not have active CEOs. They only had CEOs on an acting capacity. As a matter of fact, some of these state corporations still today have their CEOs on an acting capacity for a number of years. And this is because the board composition of this state corporation has been wanting. And I'll give an example that as of April 2018, NSSF board had no chairman, NHIF board had 2 vacant positions, the Kenya Airport Authority had no chairperson, Kenya Railways Corporation had no chairperson, amongst many others. And what we recommend is, one, that the relevant appointing authority for the respective board members should ensure all vacancies in the board of various state corporations are filled within no more than 90 days. and that the tenure of board members is staggered to avoid a situation where the term of all board members expires at the same time, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, our recommendation as well is that this very House should amend the State Corporation Act to make it clear that no entity should be allowed to make any financial commitment without having a fully active and constituted board of directors. Mr. Speaker, the Inspectorate of State Corporation should be generating and sharing a half-year status report with the Presidency and Parliament indicating the status of Board of State Corporations. The report should include the current status of boards as well as an indication of which board members are close to completing their terms. At this juncture, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind this House that it is this very committee that censured the Inspector of State Corporation to give a breakdown of state corporations that do not have a board. And it is upon us giving this information to the rest of Kenya through this very House, where it was realized that close to 1/3 of all state corporations are not properly constituted, is when we now saw the executive being able to fill in these positions. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the position of chief executive officers and managers of state corporations, such positions should not be left vacant for more than a period of 12 months. We can understand where there are issues that a position should be advertised and competitive recruitment should be done. But it is wanting where we see a position is going to be vacant for a period of years, and we have CEOs making decisions worth billions, and their position is only on an acting capacity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that we have noticed is lack of ownership documents on land and buildings. This spreads across throughout a majority of all state corporations. One of them, and I'll just like to give cases in point, is the NSSF that has lands in Mavoko and Upper Hill that the National Land Commission and the Ministry of Lands is yet to resolve. The Kenya School of Law owns property in Upper Hill. The National Council for Population, NCPD, owns lands in Muranga, Kisii, and Nairobi, among others. And several parcels of land that belong to the Kenya Railways Corporation. And then what this committee has been able to observe, Mr. Speaker, is that there has been a relatively long, not even, I would like to look for the right word, but it is painfully long that some of these audit queries regarding land have been going back and forth, some of them that have gone for decades, and these issues are yet to be resolved. And our recommendations, Mr. Speaker, is that the accounting reports is that we have indicated timelines and timeframes that we feel are enough for the National Land Commission. It is not sufficient to just say that the NLC should resolve these matters. We have gone further, and if the NLC feels that they need more time than that, then they should now start reverting back to the Committee on Implementation as to why they feel that they need a longer time. And in many cases, Mr. Speaker, we have given a variance between 90 to 120 and 180 days where these issues of land should be cleared. The Cabinet Secretary for Land, Housing and Urban and the Chairman of the NLC should put caveats on all parcels of state corporations that are currently in possession of land grabbers, Mr. Speaker. And we have seen that yesterday, or the day before yesterday, sorry, where there was the launch of the Kenya Coast Guards. And one of the things that we have realized that like fish landing sites and many others, where people are now coming up and giving this land back voluntarily to the rightful state agencies, which in return are holding it in trust for the people of Kenya. We are urging that everyone who has taken this land, Mr. Speaker, to return back this land to the people of Kenya. And then the NLC should prioritize and expedite resolving ownership issues surrounding parcels of land belonging to state corporations. We fail to understand why the NLC can be able to work with such haste when it is private land, but when it is land that belongs to state corporation, that they take their sweet time. The judiciary, Mr. Speaker, should consider prioritizing and expediting conclusion of cases involving illegal acquisition of public land with the view of restoring the land back to the public. And any officer that causes delays in processing of titles should be personally and severally held. And I need to explain here our intent as a committee, Mr. Speaker, is that we will now, in every quarter of the year, we will be presenting a report. And in the next report, you will be seeing issues like the Kenya Airport Authority, which is not here, but issues where some of these implementations of some of these projects are yet to take effect. Then we have an issue like the construction of the multi-story car park that NHIF ended up paying a variance of 338%, which was due to change of government funding policy. NSSF Hazina Towers, which I must congratulate this committee, because during our, at the right moment, we were actually able to save this country close to 6 billion, Mr. Speaker. And I will get to those details later on. But close to 6 billion was saved courtesy of this very committee, where we ended up having variants that were, were not making any sense at all. We have had projects that have taken too long that are in this report. The Kenya National Library Service Headquarters has been a project that has been ongoing from the year 2012. It was meant to be completed, Mr. Speaker, by June 2016. To date, we are ending 2018. That project is yet to be finalized. We've got the Kenya Industrial Research, KIRDI, which procurement of leather processing and production equipment. By March 2015, items worth 129 million, Mr. Speaker, were yet to be installed and put into usage. This, of course, results in vandalism. This, of course, results in depreciation of this equipment. And the committee has noted that this has resulted in loss of public funds through payment of interest on delayed payments. And Mr. Speaker, our recommendation on the same is that accounting officers should always undertake feasibility studies on any project they wish to undertake before implementing the projects. Accounting officers should place responsibilities on entities with capacities to monitor and implement projects to avoid unnecessary termination and variation. The Treasury should endeavor to allocate adequate budgetary provision to state corporations that are taking mega projects that are solely funded by the government, so that they are able to complete their projects within their scheduled time and thus minimize loss of public funds through payment of avoidable interest. Mr. Speaker, with regards to state corporations like the NSSF, NSSF should only pay the amount that was recommended by the State Department of Public Works when it comes to the issue of Hazina Trade Center. And we have also indicated, and I will get into details on the same, regarding various state corporations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one other thing that we have noted is the quality of audits. And at this juncture, I want to congratulate the Office of the Auditor General, which, despite having serious human resource challenges, has been able to conduct, and I want members to be able to understand where the onus of our concern is coming from. We are concerned that the state corporations that are audited, and the audits are done by the Office of the Auditor General himself, have more issues and are more detailed and are of more quality than those state corporations that private auditors are the ones that audit them. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that despite Section 23 of the Public Audit Act 2015, which allows the Office of the Auditor General to outsource audit assignment, the committee has noted with concern. One of them is an issue like the Kenya Power and Lighting, where there was a direct indication that there was no flow and that the KPLC had 100% no audit query and they had unqualified audits. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I will be able to indicate what the committee has been able to do. And this applies, by the way, Mr. Speaker, to a majority of the state corporations in the energy sector, which include Ketraco, which include many others. And in the last peak report, the 19th peak report actually, it was very, very clear that strategic government state corporations, one, and state corporations that are large, like these ones, should be audited by the Office of the Auditor General himself. And we, this committee, in its recommendation, are insisting that the recommendations of the 19th report should be taken into consideration. We should also amend the Public Audit Act so that we are going to restrict outsourcing of audit of state corporations, taking into consideration the strategic importance of these state corporations and the turnover of the same. And that Parliament should adopt regulations that guide the outsourcing of audit exercise of state corporation, and the guidelines will be able to give the Auditor General on directions on how to outsource, that the National Assembly and the Treasury should allocate adequate resources. Rather, Treasury should allocate adequate resources, and this very House should approve for these resources to be given to the Office of the Auditor General so that they can be able to employ more staff to efficiently audit all government entities. In the case which I have been able to talk about, Mr. Speaker, KPLC, this committee has recommended that a special audit be done on a number of issues. One of them was where there was clear fraudulence, like the issue of the faulty transformers purchasing. Secondly, we have given direction to the Office of the Auditor General to equally give a special audit on how the purchase of these special tokens was done. And we all know where Kenyans were able to lose millions collectively, where if you are someone who loses 100 or 200, collectively it reaches into billions. Why? We need to know how the outsourcing of these token cards was done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the other issues that has been seen going around in most of these state corporations is variation of tender amounts, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, an example that I have already indicated was the NHIF. This is how sad it is that a sum of 909 million blew up to 3.97 billion. From 909 through to 3.97 billion, noting an increase of 300+%. And what we have indicated in our recommendation, Mr. Speaker, is that chief executive officers and managing directors of state corporation should ensure that there's proper planning of projects and that this is undertaken with credible.
The Honorable Nasir, I don't intend to disrupt you, but you say the figures that our the variation that you speak to.
Yes, sir.
It grew from 900 million to 3.7.
909 million, Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
to 3.97 billion.
That is for over 400%, not 300%.
338%, Mr. Speaker.
Very well.
Thank you. I had indicated it was in excess of 300%.
Oh, very well. Proceed.
Thank you. And that the chief executive officers who exceed the maximum contract variation of 20%, 25%, should be surcharged for the variation in price incurred by their respective corporations over and above allowed threshold in loans committee. But the recommendations of every other committee, I will be able to indicate what our concern is and what needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that cuts across is issue of investment by state corporations. And some of these investments that have been done have had an issue of unrecoverable loss, where ownership of land is in dispute or is lost, thereby failing to realize value of money. An example is NSSF that has invested heavily in lands and building in Mavoko, yet till today, one of these issues like Mavoko had so many other players. And this is why we are also concerned with the NLC, Mr. Speaker. The land in Mavoko, those who actually claimed to own that land ended up surrendering that title. We are wondering why the NLC are taking their time to now ensure that they neutralize the situation and return that land to the rightful owner. Even a case like that, the NLC has been able to sit tight on the same. And many others, the Kenya Railways Corporation, where they invested 800 million in a bank that has since died, the Chase Bank, which is currently under receivership. And our recommendation is that state corporations should ensure that they diversify their investment portfolios to maximize on profit and safeguard against losses, and that this House should enact legislation outlining guidelines relating to the investment of surplus revenue, and that Parliament should enact legislation to regulate the deposit of money in private banks by state corporations. Mr. Speaker, regarding implementation of this committee and many other committees, what we are recommending is that parliamentary committees should form subcommittees that will work closely with the Committee of Implementation to track and report to the committee on the status of implementation of the recommendation, as well as provide institutional memory during examination of accounts. Mr. Speaker, regarding the issue of special audits, in the process of examining, we as a committee were able to get information through whistleblowers. We were able to gather more information even as and when we were going through the deliberations. And one of the ones that special reports that is expected before this very House will be the Line 5 replacement by the Kenya Pipeline Company that has also seen a variation in billions. We are going to see another where we have had unaccounted for transit goods destined to neighboring countries by the Kenya Revenue Authority. I'd like to give a case example here, Mr. Speaker, where the whistleblower indicated that there were actually about 1,000 containers that had gone missing. And when we engaged the Office of the Auditor General, these figures actually ended up reaching in close to 4,000 containers could be missing, and their whereabouts not known. So we need to find out where these containers have gone. Now, something that is of concern, a nation that cannot be able to feed its people is a nation that is literally on its knees. the National Cereals and Produce Board, Mr. Speaker. We have asked for a special audit, one, on the purchase of maize stocks for the financial year 2017-2018. And now it is even more wanting that despite there being a variance and an issue in the purchase itself, that the fact that because of people not being able to make decisions at the right time, that even that maize in itself is rotting while we have bumper harvests. So because we have a bumper harvest, NCPB cannot fill its silos because there's maize. The maize that is there in itself, how was it purchased? Was it purchased in the right way? It is wanting. Then even worse than that, the way that they stored this maize is that they cannot even be able to offload that maize that they have in their silos onto the market. And someone needs to take responsibility, Mr. Speaker. The issue of hunger, and that is the reason why we are saying implementation. This report, if adopted by this House, will indicate timelines as well in our recommendation. Mr. Speaker, then of course there's the purchase of hydrant pit valves by the Kenya Pipeline.
The Honorable Nasir, without disrupting you, I think on this one, purchase of maize stocks and the apparent shenanigans that have been going on in the maize industry and importation of this staple food to Kenya, I think the public, the Kenyan people, expect us to give them a way forward on this. So your recommendation here is you have ordered for a special audit?
Yes, we have, Mr. Speaker. We have ordered for a special audit onto both the purchase and equally, we want to find out this maize that is currently there, how usable is it? Because in fact, it is even in public knowledge that yes, those in authority are currently saying that no one wants to buy that particular maize. Very so how much money has been lost in this process? And in our recommendations, including these ones, we will include that not just being surcharged, but the most punitive measures on individuals. As I said, we cannot allow people to enrich themselves by virtue of hunger of Kenyans. This system has to end, and it is an issue that is of concern. Then, Mr. Speaker,
when do you intend to bring that particular one to the
unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, because of the fact that they have to go through the silos in the whole country, this is what has taken them a bit of time, so that the report can be a credible report.
Very well. Very well.
The other special audit that this House will be able to get is the purchase of hydrant pit valves by the Kenya Power and Light, Kenya Pipeline Corporation, and the issue of EGMS, and this is the stamping issue that has been done by the Kenya Revenue Authority. At this point, Mr. Speaker, allow me to just be able to give a brief overview of what members should be able to expect in this very committee. And one of them is the issue of Kenya Power and Lighting, as I had earlier stated. And because, and I'm repeating again, because of the fact that these private audit firms, you know, I was a bit shocked when I got into I think the honorable member is seeking attention. Mr. Speaker, it was a bit shocking when we sat down and then you realize that the then MD of Kenya Power and Lighting actually comes with a single page, and in that page he simply says, you know what, according to us we are 100% clean. One single piece of paper, and at the same time you're reading the concerns of Kenyans in the media. You're getting issues from whistleblowers as well. And we encourage Kenyans to be more vigilant and to put this House at task. And we encourage members of the Fourth Estate, Mr. Speaker, as well, to highlight on issues that are affecting Kenyans so that this House can be able to rightfully do what needs to be done. And what we have done regarding Kenya Power and Lighting is ask the Office of the Auditor General to go back the issues that have been. And I remember at that time we were walking in, I am seeing our able members who are here, and I remember us walking into the meeting, and very casually we were being told that a contractor is requesting for 20 million per week because of delayed works. 20 million per week, not because work was done, but because work was delayed. Then this amounted to 6.8 billion. 6.8 billion. Had this committee not intervened at that very, very moment, we do not know. We would have now been talking about an audit query of 6.8 billion that had already been paid. Thereafter, we said, who is the consultant? Consultant went and said, you know, 6.8 is a bit too high. Why don't we shoot it down to 1.89 billion? And we asked ourselves, where is the person for Public Works? Public Works was not involved from the inception of these projects. Where when Public Works came in, they were actually able to break it down and say that these figures should not even exceed more than 800 million, Mr. Speaker. And that is the recommendation of this very committee. And that is the recommendation that you, as members, will be giving when you adopt this particular report. Mr. Speaker, I'm seeing members from Nairobi County with us here, and this is something that touches on Nairobi. NSSF went and signed a contract with another company, and this was to do the project that is popularly known as Nyayo Estate Embakasi, Phase 6. Now, they paid 215 million, out of which a certain amount of work had already been done. What amazes us is that they actually did this. They did not seek for the right permission from the Nairobi City Council. And the Nairobi City Council, in the middle of building, told them, now that you have reached where you have reached, we are stopping you because you have not put into place certain issues, including playgrounds, and there was concern by the members of the public at that particular moment. This contract was meant to have already expired by the year 2014. Till today, it is an issue that is pending. And in our recommendation, we have said that the NSSF should liaise with the Office of the Attorney General so that they can be able to affirm whether the bank guarantee that was given by the contractor can be able to be utilized in any other way on a legal way, and that if this 215 million has gone to waste, then someone needs to be held accountable. And we are asking the Office of the Auditor General to also conduct an analysis on the same, on the amount of work that had already been done, whether the 215 million has any value for money on the same, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, going forward was the issue of Kenya medical supplies. Now, the Constitution of Kenya is very clear, and we are noting this with concern, where health is a devolved function. But we have realized, just in the year 2016-17, that the Ministry of Health paid KEMSA 600 million for purchase of drugs. Mr. Speaker, that is actually a county function. And we are saying that the national government needs to try and limit itself from overly going into functions that belong to the county government. And the county governments as well should provide budgetary allocation so these drugs can be able to be purchased in due time. Mr. Speaker, during the years that I will be able to mention, and this is 2015-16 and 16-17, KEMSA lost through expiration of drugs 352 million. The exact figure is 352 million, 134 shillings, 551 and 2 cents. 352 million. Now, what caused this? Some of the factors that caused this was during the period when we had our medics on strike. Without doctors, there's no one to prescribe the drugs. So during this period, what that means is that Kenyans, Honorable Ahmed Abdisalan.
Yes, he's
He's
just...
already stood up.
Very well. Honorable
Thank you very much.
Salat, is it?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second this motion. Mr. Speaker, I want to join my chairman to sincerely thank the members of the committee for their commitment and sacrifice in ensuring that this report is made despite their tight schedules. I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that they have executed their mandate diligently without fear or favor. Mr. Speaker, this was not an easy task. 91 sittings to deal with various state corporations, to do triangulation of information, to make field visits, and to ensure that an accurate report has been compiled. Mr. Speaker, a good number of the committee, including myself, happened to be new members and had a lot of passion in ensuring that a credible report is compiled. And of course, in the process, as well, learning. Mr. Speaker.
I'm sure that will be sorted. Very well. That will be sorted. That will be sorted by, and I can tell the staff are moving very fast on that. Honorable Marwa, please.
Mr. Speaker, the role of the board, when it comes to cooperation, the responsibility of the board, Mr. Speaker, is to provide oversight on the management of those state corporations. The board, Mr. Speaker, is supposed to approve some of the decisions, strategic decisions for investment. Mr. Speaker, they are supposed to fire and hire the management, Mr. Speaker. But when you go to some state corporations, Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President, we should develop a framework, Mr. Speaker, whereby you can have some minimum academic qualifications and some minimum experience for people to be qualified to be appointed to the boards of those state corporations. I know very well the executive has been using this to reward some political people who unfortunately maybe were rejected when it came to the general elections. And others are their sycophants, Mr. Speaker, who are appointed to go to those boards. Unfortunately, those people do not have the minimum threshold as far as academic is concerned. So it becomes very difficult, Mr. Speaker, to have a board of the people who have not even gone beyond Form 4, for that matter, Mr. Speaker, to go and oversight a CEO who has master's or PhD, who has the experience, particularly when it comes to financial matters. So the issue of oversight becomes a problem. So we are requesting the executive, when it comes to appointment of the members on the board of these corporations, they should appoint people who have the expertise. Look at state corporations like KRA. Look at state corporations like Kenya Power and Lightning. Look at state corporations like NSSF. Look at state corporations like Kenya Airports Authority, Kenya Pipeline, KenGen. These are state corporations, Mr. Speaker, which handle billions as far as investment is concerned. So when the executive is appointing people to these boards, please look at the minimum qualifications, the academic qualifications, and issues to do with experience. Some of them cannot even interpret a balance sheet, Mr. Speaker. Some of them cannot even interpret a profit and loss account. So we are requesting the executive to do justice when it comes to appointing people to the boards, because these boards, they are at a strategic level and they're the ones who provide oversight to the management. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I want to come to the auditors. It is a requirement, Mr. Speaker, that where the government has put investments, it must be audited by the Auditor General. And my colleagues have clearly put it. In some of the state corporations, Mr. Speaker, much that the Auditor General is allowed to outsource. But we have some strategic parastatals, Mr. Speaker, particularly in the energy sector.
Like in the public works, they decided on their own to come up with a plan without even doing a visibility study, because when the building was at the 15th floor, that is the time they realized that they could not go up to the 60th floor. That shows clearly that there was no visibility study which was done, and also no due diligence was done. Mr. Speaker, after, when the project was being reviewed, it happened that it was supposed to cost the Kenyan taxpayers 1.9 billion, sorry, almost 2 billion. Now, the big equation is, it was supposed to cost that at the 60th floor. Now they have reduced the contract to the project to 15th floor. What happens with the entire project, some amount which was to be spent? When you go to Nyayo Estate, you find that they started a project without involving or without getting the requisite documents, like from City Council, from NEMA, from National Construction Authority. Then that is why they started getting problems with all those other city agencies. They had already paid the 10% of the sum, which is 215 million, which at the moment, they started to lose that money. The problem I see, and I'm requesting this House to adapt this report, and if possible to read it thoroughly, you find that most of the projects which are being done by state corporation, Mr. Speaker, there is no a clear roadmap when this project will end, when it will commence, when it will end, and the amount of money which will be spent. You find there's a lot of variation, and variation means adding more money. The other one is NHIF, Mr. Speaker, a project of a parking which they were to construct, costing, which was to cost slightly less than 1 billion, that is 900 million, who are borrowing to almost 4 billion. The same project, Mr. Speaker. This shows how we have wastage in our state corporation. Mr. Speaker, if you check what is happening, currently, almost every state corporation which is mentioned in this, report, requires the Auditor General to do a forensic audit in order to get the in-depth of what is happening. Most of them have outsourced that service to private auditors, and you find that they are giving them clean bill. But after time, you just hear that, oh, there's a problem with the Kenya Power, there's a problem with the Kenya Pipeline, there's a problem with the Serious Board. So this is a problem which is there and is created mostly by the board and the management. We need to check this one critically if we are to succeed and if we are to stop wastage. Mr. Speaker, the other corporation is Kenya Pipeline. You find that it was purchasing equipment, then after some times, they stop the supplier, they engage another supplier, and ultimately, you see that they are losing money in every variation which is coming up. Mr. Speaker, there's also Serious Board. Serious Board, you find that they are purchasing maize. That maize at the same time, farmers who are supplying the same maize, they are not being paid. The same farmers, you find that they are purchasing like bags. Those bags, you find that, and the Treasury ends up spending a lot of money. The big equation is, in all these state corporations, Mr. Speaker, Treasury is represented. Then there's the question begs, who is this? Because if the Treasury is represented, why are we having all this kind of wastage? Mr. Speaker, I ask this House to support this report. Those who have not gone through the report, they can even go the report so that they can see the work which was done by PIC. I support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next is Honorable Passaris.
We're going to do this, we're going to do that, but we seem to have eased off on the headlines on corruption. We're looking here in the recommendations that I hope the implementation committee under the able chair of Ole Kenta here, will actually move very quickly and come back within a month, or when we come back from recess, come back and tell us what have you done with all this money that is being lost. We're talking about the National Land Commission and the title deeds. This government has to stop passing the buck and saying, oh, it's this one that's failing or that one that's failing. If it's an anti-corruption that's not prosecuting cases, or if it's a National Land Committee that's not issuing title deeds for state corporations where huge sums of money was spent, public funds. What are we telling the people? That we're failing because this one has done something wrong? We're passing the buck. And the fact is, all of us are equally responsible to make sure that the monies of this country, the taxpayers' money, is put to good use. To understand that you have so many state corporations that don't have boards, right? So you have the CEOs doing what they want. I really hope that when the forensics are done and additional audits are conducted, you will be able to actually pinpoint and say that this CEO, actually, we've recommended that he be suspended immediately. All right, because here we are, we're looking at state corporations like, NSSF, where lots of money was used into projects. NHIF, you're putting up a parking lot. I mean, shouldn't we actually feel, I sit here and I get disturbed, and I keep thinking, do all the members in this house actually understand that when we stand here and we talk about, and we table such reports and we talk about the losses, then what? Is anti-corruption, is it working? Are our systems working? Because we are high in debt, we're losing money. Every committee comes in here and says the same thing. We've lost money here, we've lost money here, we've lost money here. We don't have boards. The anti-corruption, we're recommending that you actually do something about this. But it's like we're joking. It's like we haven't got it. The country has poverty. We cannot afford to have any more corruption. We cannot. I mean, people can't afford to bury their dead. People can't afford medical. People can't afford to feed their children. People are having non-communicable diseases because of failures in various areas. This morning we were sitting down and discussing about whether we're actually coping with some of the things that are going wrong in this country. We have so much road carnage.
Not listening to her, but from the way she actually spoke and the passion that she have for the poor of this country, and the way she described some issues, including that if we don't fight corruption, then we create more poor people in this country. And if they have nothing to eat, definitely they'll come to eat the rich. You know that I'm quoting just direct from her. And this is a very true statement. Despite the fact that she had a bit by saying that if Slay Queen come to this house, then they will do a marvelous job. Honorable Speaker, this particular report touches on issues of state corporation. And I was once a chairman of a state corporation. Honorable Speaker, a lot of money, taxes of our poor citizens are vested in the hands of those who will live to manage state corporation. And what they have been doing there is to improvise this country, is to make this country poorer and poorer day in and day out. Honorable Speaker, some of these state corporations, I don't know where they receive these audit reports, because all of them have clean bill of health. They are not corrupt, but yet money is being lost. Honorable Speaker, if I only pick some of the state corporations that we know, Honorable Speaker, for instance, KQ is a state corporation doing business that is being done by Fly 540, charging more than Fly 540, having more aeroplanes than Flight 540, but again, making more losses. And every day, we are resuscitating it. Honorable Speaker, Honorable Speaker.
Order, Honorable. What is it, Honorable Krosh, member for Ajit West? What is your point of order? Is it information or is it? Well, it doesn't look like a point of order, but it is information. But I'm sure Honorable Olisankok is well guided.
Thank you very much for that, Honorable Speaker. I stay guided, and Honorable Speaker,
is it? What is it?
I'm congratulating the chair and is raising on the point of order.
Honorable Olisankok. What is it, Honorable Nasil Sharif?
Mr. Speaker, and I'm saying this so that I can be able to assist Honorable Sankok on the same.
Are you giving your Honorable Sankok information?
It is both information and order, Mr. Speaker.
It can't be both.
It is actually, Mr. Speaker. Maybe if you will allow me just 10 seconds of his time.
Honorable Sankok, you need that information?
Yes, I need the
information.
Please,
Honorable
Thank you.
Nasil, please.
Thank you. First of all, as Honorable Kolosh rightfully put it, Kenya Airways is not a state corporation. It is a state investment. And what has happened now, as per my meeting with the House Business Committee and parliamentary leadership, in terms of state investments, we as a committee are going to be getting reports from the investment secretary on the performance of these entities, so that we can be able, because there's no auditing that is being done on the same that is passing through this very house.
Very well.
So we are going to be doing that. Thank you.
Very well. Very well. Honorable Olisankok, please.
Honorable Speaker, I'm guided accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I also want to comment on the issue of the delays that we have in the appointing of the CEOs and the managers, Mr. Speaker. We found that many of these state corporations, their compositions are not up to date. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I do not see any reason why a CEO can act for more than a year, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I support this committee recommendation that if anyone, Mr. Speaker, acts for more than a year, then automatically this person qualifies to be the CEO of this state corporation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is also true that we need, for the issues of RAD, we also need to support the committee when they come up with the recommendation that the cabinet secretary and the chair for the RAD commission, Mr. Speaker, put a caveat to the state corporation RADs that have been owned by private HUD. Mr. Speaker, why we are saying this is to make sure that these RADs are not abused, Mr. Speaker. And if they are left like this,